Good afternoon. Welcome to the Maine edition of our state webinar series, exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, and we will leave time for both, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a question section of the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side. That decouples it from the control panel, and you can then type your questions and comments in there. We are recording this webinar and will send the recording link to everyone who is registered. Please feel free to share that recording with others. So let me now introduce myself. I am Chris Coffin, American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. I have two great co-hosts with me today, Nate Latoile, who is AFT's New England Director, and Jamie Pottern, who is New England Program Manager for AFT. And for those of you not familiar with AFT, though I suspect most of you are, let me do a very quick introduction. We're a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We believe that saving the land that sustains us means focusing not just on retaining and protecting the agricultural land base, but on the management of that land as well, and on the farmers, ranchers, and landowners who work the land. We work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress, from direct land protection to soil health and water quality initiatives, to training service providers to help a new generation of farmers and ranchers gain access to the land. Our programming and research inform our state and federal policy development and advocacy. We have 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. So let me now turn it over to Nate.
Good afternoon, Chris. Thank you so much. We're delighted to be joined today by a number of valued partners, including numerous program staff from Maine's Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, including the Land for Maine's Future program, Maine Farmland Trust, Maine Dairy Industry Association, Land for Good, Blue Hill Heritage Trust, Wolf Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment, Greater Level Land Trust, National Family Farm Coalition, Tufts University, and numerous farmers from across the state. Thank you for all joining us today, and for anybody else who registered after I was able to see the invite list. We'd like to recognize USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service and thank them especially for their collaboration and support of this project. They've been an integral partner, as has our research partner in this project, Conservation Science Partners. I'd also like to welcome a very special guest, Commissioner Beal. Commissioner Beal has served as Commissioner of the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry since February of 2019. DACF is charged with promoting and advancing Maine's agricultural resources, protecting and enhancing nearly 18 million acres of forest land, managing more than 700,000 acres of state parks and public lands, and administering numerous science-based programs focused on resource management, land use planning, and conservation. Before leading DACF, Amanda was the president and CEO of Maine Farmland Trust and has served on the boards and steering committees of many agricultural, food system, fisheries, and conservation-related organizations over the years. She also co-authored a New England food vision, healthy food for all, sustainable farming and fishing, thriving communities. So thank you so much for joining us, Commissioner. We know your schedule is very busy, so we appreciate you taking the time to join us this afternoon. I'd like to ask you a couple questions, but also feel free to give some wider ranging answers or thoughts at the start if you wish. And so maybe we'll just jump right in with the first question. You've spent a significant part of your career focused on keeping Maine farmland in farming and keeping farmers on the land. Given your background and expertise, what are you most concerned about today when it comes to Maine's farmland?
Thank you for that question, Nathan. And first of all, I just want to start by saying thank you to American Farmland Trust for undertaking this really important research. I think it's critically important for us all to understand land use trends and threats to our agricultural lands. And in Maine, as you know, we're a state with the ability to produce a diverse number of agricultural products, from food to fiber. And we have many innovative and hardworking farmers, and their hard work is really the basis for a significant portion of our overall economy, as well as being important to our heritage and our culture here in Maine. And many of these farmers contribute to our food security and are integral to other sectors such as tourism. In fact, we have agritourism opportunities that are provided directly, but they also contribute to very high quality ingredients that have established Maine as a place to go for great food. And our farms support many other agriculture related businesses and services, which help other industries as well. And we have a lot to celebrate about agriculture year round. And I know that this year is a bit different in that we aren't able to promote our regular gatherings, but we usually do that through very well attended events such as Maine Maple Sunday in the spring, Open Farm Day, our agricultural fairs, and innovative opportunities like following the Maine Cheese Trail or the Maine Beer or Wine Trail. And we're always looking for new ways to promote agriculture in Maine. And in fact, I'm excited to say that we just launched our Real Maine brand and website to help consumers connect with Maine-grown products. And that link can be found on our website. So that's just a really quick snapshot of what agriculture looks like in Maine and how incredibly important it and all of our farms are to our everyday lives. As to the question, what am I most concerned about today when it comes to Maine farmland? Well, I guess I would say that in general, Maine is a big state, and I think it's easy to take for granted that we have a lot of land. But our best farmland soils are a finite resource, and we are clearly losing farmland to development in both urban and rural areas of the state. It's really critical that we not take this resource for granted, as it is important to us in so many ways. And we do know that between the 2012 and 2017 Ag Census, we lost a significant amount of farmland from production, about 10% of Maine's active farmland, in fact. And when land is not being actively farmed, it increases the risk of conversion to other uses, often permanently. We also know that Maine was in the top 5 states with declines in farmland between 2012 and 2017, and that is not a top 5 list that we want to be on. And of course, the market disruptions experienced by our farmers during the COVID-19 crisis has been very destabilizing for some farms, which also puts them at risk. And at the same time, the situation has really raised a lot of awareness across the state about how important our farms are and has generated notable support from consumers. And so to end my answer to this question on a more positive note, I think we have a real opportunity to build on that understanding of the importance of supporting our farmers and protecting farmland from development so it can continue to be a resource to us and the New England region as a whole. And I would say that I think we are at a crossroads, and the decisions we make now around land use, particularly as it relates to farmland, will have significant impacts into the future and for many generations to come.
Thank you, Commissioner. Given those opportunities, can you talk a little bit about some of the things the department is doing now and might be considering doing in the future to address these concerns?
Sure, happy to. Well, I guess I'd say first and foremost, we are working to address this in a broader sense by the work we're already doing around enhancing farm vitality, which is work to assure that our farms are well positioned and have the resources they need to thrive. And recently, we've been looking at some of our various loan funds and grant programs with an eye toward making sure they really work well for farmers and that they can access the support that they need. And if not, to look at what changes need to be made to make them more relevant and effective. We're also working on these and other issues in collaboration with other entities in Maine who play very important roles in supporting agriculture, from our commodity groups that represent sectors like potatoes, dairy, and wild blueberries, to the University of Maine and Cooperative Extension Program, the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, Maine Farmland Trust, and the Maine Farm Bureau, and many more. And particularly right now, as we're all grappling with the impacts of COVID-19, it is so important that we work together and try to maximize the resources we have to support our farmers in as many ways as we can. And one of the specific ways we have been working on issues related to farmland loss is through advocating for ongoing support for the Land for Maine's Future program, which helps to protect farmland through easements that ensure that land won't be converted to another use. This is a program that has helped to protect 41 farms to date, encompassing nearly 10,000 acres of farmland. And we've also been engaging in conversations about renewable energy development and working to develop recommendations for project siting to minimize impacts to agricultural soils. And in addition to that, we've also been very involved in the work of the Natural and Working Lands Work Group of Maine Climate Council. That work group recently presented 5 recommended strategies to the Maine Climate Council, one of which is to protect our natural and working lands. Protecting farmland in particular presents a key opportunity to sequester carbon and also to utilize our farmland in a way that gives us greater control over the climate impacts of food production. As it stands now, about 85 to 90% of what we consume comes from elsewhere. If we work to relocalize that production using practices that are proven to reduce our overall greenhouse gas emissions, we can make real gains in addressing climate change, as well as have a positive impact on our state's economy. So those are just a few examples of what we're working on.
Commissioner, those are some really encouraging examples. How can Maine stakeholders help to keep the issue of farmland loss front and center in their communities and with the state and federal policymakers?
Well, I would say that, first they can support our farmers by buying directly from them and also making it known to any retail establishments that they shop in that they want to be able to access Maine-grown products through them. A thriving farm with stable markets is at a reduced risk of losing that farm to develop, or we are at a reduced risk of losing that farm to development if it is thriving and doing well. And I would also say to support programs like Land for Maine's Future and talk with your legislative representatives to let them know that this is a program and that farmland protection and supporting farms is an issue that you care greatly about. It's important that we make sure that we have those conversations. You can also reach out to your local land trust or to Maine Farmland Trust here in Maine, which is an important statewide organization that specifically focuses on farmland protection, farmland access, and farm viability, and ask how you can get involved in supporting their work. And finally, you can also work with your town to ensure that local ordinances are beneficial to agriculture and agricultural businesses, and that development activities are done in a way that discourages the loss of farmland.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We'd like to thank you again for your leadership and look forward to continuing to work with you on further farmland retention and protection in Maine. And I think there'll be some opportunities to have some questions a little bit later in this presentation, both from the audience and maybe from Chris and I. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Nate, and thank you so much, Commissioner, for joining us. The department is lucky to have you. Maine Farmland Trust is unfortunate to lose you, and I should also make that link with Maine Farmland Trust and say that American Farmland Trust is very lucky to have another former executive director from the Maine Farmland Trust, John Piatti, who is our president and CEO. So there are lots of great connections with Maine. So with that, let's turn to the findings from this report. We're focusing on the state of the states, which is the second in this research series. It paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state, and it documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who were not able to join us for our launch webinars in May, let me touch very quickly on the national findings. We looked at a period for this report from 2001 to 2016, which is a period of historically low housing starts and a deep recession in the midst of it. Nevertheless, the U.S. converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equivalent to all the land planted in the U.S. to fruits, nuts, and vegetables in 2017. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big of a threat it is. Importantly, more than 4.4 million acres of the land converted was what we have identified as nationally significant land. That's land best suited for intensive food and crop production. In addition to the National Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report, we were lucky to receive funding to produce a regional Farms Under Threat report that weaves together some of the national, spatial, and policy findings with some specific New England findings. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie to discuss that report very briefly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Potter, and as Chris introduced earlier, I'm the New England Program Manager with AFT. And this past winter, my colleague Laura Barley and I authored this regional report entitled Farms Under Threat, a New England Perspective. And so this report dives a little deeper into the New England region as a whole, and also draws on a variety of other reports and data sets like the USDA Ag Census and a New England Food Vision. The report goes beyond the farmland itself and also examines threats and opportunities for New England's farm viability and its farmers. It centers on issues of justice, equity, and climate change, and provides recommendations for how we might achieve greater regional resilience for the future. So we encourage you to download and read the report, which you can find on our Farmland Information Center. We've got the link here on the slide. I also just wanted to mention I'm available to present on these findings to your community, so I invite you to reach out to me about that, and I'll be hanging on here on this presentation at the end if you have any further questions about that. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Jamie. Now we are going to dive into the data available for Maine on our interactive website. And we will be ably assisted in our cruise through this website by our colleague, Beth Fraser. So Beth, thank you. And my understanding is that she's been having a few connection challenges. And if that happens again, we will figure out a way, Beth. So all is well, we hope. So let's start with this reports and data tab over here to the right. This is where you can find the full report, where you can find the full scorecard, and where you can find a lot of information about the methodology we used, including the way we created our PVR values, which is something we're going to talk about. If you're interested in getting access to any of the spatial data that we used, you can click on this thing that Beth is pointing to, the Geospatial Data Layers tab. That will take you to a form that you can fill out, and we will be back in touch to let you know what is available and when it will be available, because we do want to make these spatial data layers available to folks to use in many different ways. So with that, now let's go to select a state, and we'll go down and we'll choose Maine. And from here, you can find both the spatial mapping and the policy scorecard information. We're going to start on the spatial side, and we're actually going to start by pointing out this download Maine conversion summary down here on the lower left. This is an easily downloadable, keyword easily downloadable, two-pager with a lot of great infographics and some of the key information available. And we just want to point this out to folks in case it's useful for newsletters or websites or conversations with journalists or policymakers. So know that that's available from the website as well. So let's turn now to the 4 different types of data layers that we have on the spatial side. The first is land cover and use. We used multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the US. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low density residential development. And that if Beth can zoom in, it's the orange that you can see there. Maybe she can't zoom in right now, but we'll look at that later. We also did a first ever attempt to spatially identify woodlands that are associated with a farm. Again, this is something that while the Census of Ag talks about the amount of woodland that farmers and rural landowners manage, that has never been spatially identified before. So our mapping shows 1.1 million acres of agricultural land in Maine, including 586,200 acres of cropland, 137,800 acres of pasture, and 405,500 acres of woodland associated with farms. So moving to the quality of this land, we wanted to analyze quality of land being lost to development, not just the quantity. So if we can go to the PBR values. So we created, with the help of a national panel of experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PBR values across the state. The darker the green, the higher the PBR value, and the higher the PBR value, the higher the suitability for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. So we then took these PBR values and created a category of land that we've dubbed nationally significant. Again, this was done with our panel of national experts. This next map shows the nationally significant ag land in Maine. It consists of about 552,000 acres, which is 49% of the state's total agricultural land base. Most of this land is in cropland, so 441,800 acres, with about 68,200 acres of woodland and 42,300 acres in pasture. The last category that we mapped was conversion. And again, we looked at this 15-year period from 2001 to 2016. We mapped conversion to two types of land use. One, to urban and highly developed land use, which is what folks are most familiar with. So this is residential, commercial, industrial areas, and typically moving out from the edges of cities and towns. But in this category is also rural, industrial, and energy production sites, including oil and well gas pads and larger scale solar installations. The second type of conversion we mapped is low density residential development, or LDR as we dubbed it. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. So when we looked at Maine's conversion patterns, the vast majority of Maine's conversion over this time period was to this low density residential land use, 81% of it, in fact. And a note here about LDR. There may be some active agriculture on land designated as LDR, and some of these small parcels may be highly productive and profitable. But we also know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land in Maine that was considered LDR in 2001 was 6 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR creates management challenges for producers who have to adjust to farming in and around non-farming neighbors. Total ag land converted over this period was just shy of 17,700 acres. Of that, 8,500 acres was cropland, 6,500 acres of woodland, and 2,700 acres of pasture. Looking at the quality of the land converted, almost 40% was land considered nationally significant. And the reason we're concerned about the loss of this especially productive land is a number of fronts. First, from an economic perspective, as producers are forced to move to more marginal land, input costs tend to go up and or crop yields tend to go down. And from an environmental perspective, the loss of this high quality land creates more pressure to convert woodlots, pastures, buffer strips to cropland. So reducing conversion to development is critical to making progress on water quality, wildlife habitat, and climate goals. So with that, let me turn it over to Nate for some additional perspectives about the spatial findings.
Sure, thanks so much, Chris. You know, I don't think we can stress enough the impact that LDR has in a place like Maine. Chris mentioned the breakdown between UHD and LDR development, and while the percentage of farmland loss might be a little bit lower in a state like Maine than in some other New England states, the impact of that LDR is pretty significant. Beth, if we could zoom in on kind of the Skowhegan area, yeah, and maybe flip over to the land use type. And what is important to realize about this orange color, the low density residential, as Chris mentioned, there may very well be active agriculture going on in those areas, but those are the areas of the community, of the state, of a county that are most threatened by future development and have begun to shift from a predominantly agricultural stance to a far more residential or commercial land use. And so it is not a statement that land has actually flipped over from an agricultural usage to residential, but we can tell that is the next land that will likely be developed. That is the most threatened land within a particular geographic area. And as we begin to look out over the proximity of some of these smaller urban centers in Maine and the amazing agricultural land around those urban centers, we see a large amount of this low density residential land use. And so Commissioner, maybe if I could kind of call on you and put you on the spot, we talked about some of the tools that could help protect farmland generally, and I think you talked about a really important one, which was viability. I'm also curious if you have thoughts about this particular type of farmland in very close proximity to residential and other commercial uses, and how we can really come up with practices, with policies that target that type of land particularly.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so grateful that you all have really done this work and that we can look at this on a much finer scale than we have been able to in the past. I mean, I think, you know, what's troubling has been mentioned previously, in that this land is, although it's not converted yet, it's likely to be the next land that we're looking at losing as farmland, and that does have a real ripple effect on farm viability. As you mentioned, as farmers get pushed out further, the input costs go up, and the other impact that is a ripple effect of this is having to clear more forest for farmland in order to recover some of that production base. And, you know, as we know, our forests in Maine they give us a real opportunity to also sequester a lot of carbon. Our working forests do a lot of that for us, and as we lose forest, that's another trade-off. So I think that, you know, this is a time, again, where we shouldn't be taking it for granted that we have so much land. We use our land quite purposefully, and particularly when we're talking about working lands and the trade-off between development and being able to continue using them as working lands, there are a lot of things that are sort of lost if we aren't careful about that process or that conversion. So I think we need to be having a broader conversation about the highest and best use of land in general, and to be thinking about the characteristics that and the benefits that different types of land uses provide to us.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. The likelihood that land, that LDR land will be converted to UHD conversion, which is a much more permanent, much more enduring type of conversion, is actually 6 times more likely than the other farmland in the state. So I think it's really important message to take away from today, and it's an important aspect of the tools that this Farms Under Threat State of the States report can share and make available to planners, local communities, et cetera. Chris, why don't why don't I toss it back to you for the policy scorecard?
Great, thank you. Before we turn to the policy scorecard, we're actually going to stop and get some input from all of you. We're interested in your perspectives on what will drive agricultural land conversion over the next 10 to 20 years in Maine. And we do this here because as we think about policy response, what Maine has done thus far and what Maine needs to do in the future, it depends on what people think is going to drive conversion. So if there are things on here, if there's something missing that you think is going to be the real driver of conversion, please write it in. We're interested in your thoughts, so write it in on the question panel. You are also welcome to vote for more than one if you feel strongly that there are multiple drivers of conversion. So let's stop for a minute, let you guys vote. If you are having trouble voting, it might be that you're in full screen mode. You have to come out of that to be able to vote. So we'll take a minute to see how people vote. Okay, Beth, what are we finding here? Great, this is very helpful. Well, I will say one thing. This is interesting. We have now done these webinars in, I believe it's 29 states. And Maine is the first state where people on the webinar felt that poorly planned energy development is as big a threat or as big a conversion threat as anything else, which is very interesting. But the other two here, the generational transfer of land and sort of more of the same on the poorly planned commercial, industrial, residential development, are certainly ones that folks around the country are deeply concerned at. And noticing that's not to say that climate change and ag viability are not drivers, and I do want to call them out, that people also think that those are significant potential drivers into the future. So with that, let's turn to the policy scorecard. Our intent with it is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address these drivers of conversion. While we've been involved in policy development, AFT has, since our founding, this is our first effort at a state policy scorecard. And we want to acknowledge that there are many ways that states support agriculture, and this is not an attempt to score them all. So for instance, Commissioner Beal talked a lot about what the department is doing around promotion, around marketing, around looking at its grants and loans programs for farmers. We know that many things, particularly the viability and profitability of farm businesses, is something that states do through direct support, through support for extension services, and we couldn't look at them all. So what we did was we looked at 6 specific state policies and programs that are linked to the land. And so these we looked at purchase of ag conservation easement programs. Most people know them as PDR or farmland preservation programs. There are 28 states that have them, including Maine. We looked at land use planning, which most states, including Maine, delegate planning authority to local governments, but states can play an important and active role in retaining their base, agricultural land base, by requiring and incentivizing localities to do certain things, and that's what we looked at. We looked at property tax relief for agricultural land, and every state in the country has enacted a program of some kind to reduce property taxes in recognition that working lands require far less in municipal services than does residential development. We looked at agricultural district programs. There are 14 states around the country that have these types of programs that encourage landowners to form special areas to support agriculture. These types of programs provide protections and incentives that differ by state. Some protect agricultural landowners with limits on annexation inside the district. Some limit eminent domain use and provide protections from the siting of public facilities and infrastructure. Some offer tax incentives, and some require district enrollment as a precondition to participation in a PDR program. And then we looked at two types of programs that are focused on land access and generational transfer. Those are farm link programs and state leasing. In the farm link category, we included only state-supported programs. We did that intentionally. This was really focused on state policies, and that's why we did not look at privately run farmland programs such as Maine Farmland Trust program. We recognize that these are very valuable, but we also believe that state support for this type of listing, linking, matching, providing assistance to help match up retiring and exiting landowners with farm seekers is hugely important. And then lastly, on state leasing, we looked at those programs that make state-owned land available to farmers. Sometimes that's their primary purpose, but more often agricultural use in some of these state leasing programs is secondary to protecting wildlife or generating income for the state. So now you can see how, if we go down a little bit, we can see how Maine scores relative to other states. It has 4 of the 6 policies, again, not ag districts, and FarmLink is a private NGO-run program. It's above the median in PACE planning property tax, below the median in state leasing. So we're going to take a look at a couple of these, also to show you sort of how we did this. So under the select policy or program, let's go to PACE. And if you scroll down, you can see across the top how we scored them. And at the bottom, you will see the factors that went into each one of these components. So if you're really looking to see how states are getting scores and what they're doing, you can find that information all here. But just a couple of highlights on the PACE program front. Maine gets good points for the program authority, how Land for Maine's future works, and that program infrastructure, the fact that it does frequency of monitoring of easements. Where it lags behind is the per capita investment. So the average funds spent per capita you see is low compared to the states that are higher, and that in turn translates into the average number of easements acquired, which tends to be lower. And lastly, the other point, just when you look all the way across and you look to acres protected to acres converted, again, the states that are higher on this list are doing more, that are protecting it. They're keeping pace with or keeping more pace anyway, in protecting land compared to how much land is being converted in the state. So, before we leave PACE, I just do want to mention the federal matching funds available through the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Both of these are USDA NRCS programs. We know there have been challenges in the past, particularly with the use of ASEP in Maine. The National Ag Land Network will be working and doing outreach later in the summer and the fall around talking with partners around the Northeast to see ways that these programs can be used effectively by state partners. And so we look forward to further conversations around that later in the year. So looking at land use planning, Maine drops a little bit further down in points. It gets points for having the Growth Management Act and for requiring local comprehensive plans in order to enact zoning regulations. Gets points for authorizing growth management plans and linking those plans to protecting ag resources. But states that score higher here have specific state goals around both compact development and retention of farm and ranch land. And then they either require consistency or incentivize consistency between that local planning and zoning and those state goals. looking quickly to property tax relief, Maine here gets points for having a minimum income requirement for its farmland property tax program and for having withdrawal penalties. States that scored higher in this tend to use those withdrawal fees to help fund state and local farmland protection efforts. I would also note that states that scored higher than Maine, when you look at the number for the acres enrolled, Maine's enrollment in its state program is low relative to quite a number of other states. I would note we did not score it in here. It's sort of a unique thing, but we do want to point it out because we think it is an innovation of Maine's, and that's the voluntary municipal farm support program. Essentially, it enables communities to reimburse property taxes on farmland and farm buildings in exchange for 20-year conservation easements. And we think that this is a innovative use. We encourage its use in Maine, and I talk about it in other places when we're talking about property tax relief. And then lastly, on state leasing, just to mention that most of the land that is leased for agriculture in Maine is done through the Bureau of Parks and Land. I think a little bit of additional land is leased through the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. It appears to be about 700 acres a year. We included this component because we think that state-owned lands represent an important avenue to enable land access for farmers that traditionally have had harder barriers and had more barriers to land access. So young, beginning, veteran, historically disadvantaged farmers. States that have done well here are ones that have done a comprehensive inventory, that have looked at leasing opportunities beyond just their natural resources agencies, to look at Department of Corrections, to look at whatever might be the sort of general management entity for the state and disposal of surplus properties, to look again, are there other opportunities? Are there smaller parcels in more urban areas that could be used for agriculture? So this is an area, again, that we think holds promise for states to do more. And I think with that, I better stop, given what time it is, and turn it. Well, no, we're not going to turn to a question yet. We're going to launch a second poll, which is asking you what you think would be, what policies do you think would be important to look at in Maine to retain and protect agricultural land. And obviously we are missing two. We apologize for that. We couldn't put in state-owned land. We couldn't put in farm link. There are many other things that you could focus on as well. So if you feel like your answer is not here, please, again, feel free to write it in, but we're interested amongst these ones, what you would prioritize. Okay, let's take a look, Beth. All right, so land use planning, PACE, property tax relief, that's great. I would note that the National Ag Land Network this fall is going to be doing a series of webinars that will be focused on each of these policy types. So we will spend an entire webinar thinking and talking about land use planning, which could take multiple webinars, but we're going to start with, here are what the states that scored high in the scorecard have done, why we think they're so valuable, and we will hear from folks within those states to talk about their planning approach. Ditto with PACE programs and property tax relief. So please be on the lookout for that, that is coming this fall. And as we go out of the website, we just want to talk for a moment about this protected agricultural land database that we're developing. Protected land was not included in the spatial findings that we had. That's because there's not a comprehensive national database that looks specifically at protected agricultural land. We're building that database now. We can see that we have a lot of good information from Maine already. If you are a land trust and have not heard from us, then you hold agricultural conservation easements, please type your organization in on the question panel and we will be back in touch, because we want to be sure that we have captured all information from every state. And so with that, let me stop and turn it back to Nate first to see if there are any questions.
Sure, thank you, Chris. We don't have a lot of questions, so while I've got two here. If folks do have questions, now's your chance to plug them into the chat there. The first one, Commissioner, I'd like to actually put to you, and it came in as a part of the poll. Where do you see the most opportunity to increase the support for the Land for Maine's Future program, specifically around funding for that?
Yes, well, I guess I have to acknowledge that, you know, we're in a challenging time right now where we know that our revenues across the board are going to be impacted by the economic downturn due to COVID-19. At the same time, for all the reasons that we've talked about on this webinar so far, the work of Land for Maine's Future is incredibly important and lasting for the people of Maine. And there is actually really strong support for the program. And I think that, you know, we just need to continue to work with folks that see the value of it and work on securing more resources for that program going forward, because the work that it is doing is so critically important for us across the board.
Thank you, Commissioner. The other question I got, I think, is actually most suited for Jamie. Jamie, what tools can best be used to help with farmland access for historically disadvantaged farmers?
Sure, thanks, Nate. Well, I know there are folks on the call who work for organizations for whom that is their mission. I will say that in the Farms Under Threat, a New England Perspective report, we did have an opportunity to dig a little bit more into the 2017 USDA agricultural census. And while we know that the ag census is by any means not a complete picture that's truly representative of racial demographics, it does show some clear trends. And so I don't have that data broken out for Maine specifically, but for New England as a whole, we do know that 94% of New England's producers are white and 6% are non-white farmers, which is likely not surprising to folks. But we do see some trends, which is that the non-white farming population, it's mostly increasing. We know many are new and beginning farmers. We know many do not own their land. And so there are some great nonprofit organizations out there, like Cultivating Community and others, who are working to support farmers of color and new entry farmers. And Maine is really championing that work in many ways. But I think there are a lot of other opportunities for land trusts, both local land trusts, statewide land trusts, and municipalities to really be thinking about ways that they can make lands that they have control over available for agriculture, for historically disadvantaged farmers or those who just haven't had access. And that can be done in a variety of ways. I think it's going to take a lot of work in terms of building true and authentic relationships and really looking toward the community seeking land to figure out what is the best approach and what kinds of secure land tenure they're really seeking. But there are all kinds of really creative strategies, ranging from incubator farms to creative, long-term ground leases, to just giving land back. And I know there's been a lot of work done in conversations with Indigenous communities, and really just deferring back to the communities and hearing from them in terms of what they're really seeking and needing for the populations that they're serving. So I think it's a huge opportunity for a lot of reparative justice and healing work to be done in Maine and in other parts of New England. And on that note, I just wanted to mention that here at AFT, we have a grant, and we're partnering with colleagues at Maine Farmland Trust, as well as a couple other land trusts in New Hampshire and Vermont, as well as the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. And we're putting on a webinar series this summer with 15 webinars we're actually giving with 5 kind of core content areas. And 2 of those are particularly relevant to this conversation. One is making your land available for farmers. And then we're having one that's particularly around what communities can do to support Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color in your community. And so Stephanie Morningstar from the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust will be kind of the anchor speaker for that workshop. And we're really, really thrilled to be partnering in that way with these really great organizations. So stay tuned for the registration. We'll likely be sending that out next week on various channels, and we hope you'll consider registering for the workshops.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you. So that I think is it for the questions. So we can jump back to the presentation. Time is not on our side in saving our farmland, which is why AFT has announced a bold goal for doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conservation from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. We know that to get to that goal, we need to lock arms with many partners and practitioners who are on this call and others from around the US. And we're deeply concerned about saving the land that sustains us. So we hope that you'll all be part of this movement as well. Here are some of the ways that AFT will be strengthening its commitment to farmland protection, and specifically how they'll impact Maine. A little bit later, we'll get into the national ag land networks, but we're also looking to build our capacity to serve New England. We're increasing our staff capacity to focus on farmland protection, policy, education, conservation planning, and grant making throughout New England. We're partnering with other land trusts and other organizations to pursue innovative land protection projects to increase the number of protected acres in the region and the conservation practices implemented on those acres. We're conducting a series of webinars that Jamie mentioned earlier. We're focusing, we need to advocate for stronger state and federal policies, taking the lead on most issues in Maine from strong local allies like Maine Farmland Trust and DACF, but also driving the conversation ourselves on some key items. We're promoting research-based decision-making. We do plan to use the findings from Farms Under Threat to guide our activities on the ground, and we're actively building on this research to project future threats from development and climate change out to 2040. We're finalizing the findings of a joint 2-year research project on solar development policies and practices across New England and incorporating them into our advocacy efforts around the region. And right here in Maine, I was heartened to see the response to the survey about poorly planned energy development that aligns really well with some of our work. We're also providing direct financial support to farmers. We're working to help farmers access farmland, protect their farmland, and to fill gaps in infrastructure on their farms by providing grants, generally in the $500 to $5,000 range through several different grant programs. Check out our website or contact Jamie and I for more information on those. If we can jump to the next slide. So what can Maine do? There's only one state that AFT believes has a truly thorough understanding of its farmland resources, and that's California. They have done more than any other state, and we really think that states need a far better grasp of what they have, where they're losing farmland, and we encourage further analyzing and mapping of our agricultural lands and trends. We need to strengthen or adopt a coordinated suite of policies. Commissioner Beal gave a compelling call to action at AFT's recent conference in Boston, where she actually called for not just holistic coordinated policies, but holistic regional coordination on these items. New England is a region. It is a very integrated region, and Maine plays a crucial role in food production for this region. and coming up with a coordinated suite of policies that look at farmland protection, that look at forest land usage, that look at development, that look at energy production. We've got to do this in a coordinated manner. Supporting farm viability and access to land. Again, the commissioner mentioned earlier, I'll repeat her words, a thriving farm with stable markets is far less at risk to conversion. AFT sees farm viability challenges as one of the major threats to farmland conservation in New England. Everything from the abandonment of marginal pasture land to the incredible challenges in our dairy industry right now. We must work to address these farm viability issues because, again, those thriving farms with stable markets are much more secure. But we must also work to begin proactively and aggressively addressing issues of farmland access, especially for BIPOC farmers. These can be in the form of tax credits, the land leasing program adaptions, direct financial support through grants and interest-free loans, or direct access to farmlands. We need a plan for agriculture, not just around it. There was a great statewide planning process in the Maine food strategy, and we encourage Maine to continue to think through and plan how it fits into both, how food strategy fits both into Maine's plans and those broader New England plans, such as the New England Food Vision. Food sovereignty and security are issues that are well known to Maine agricultural policy leaders, but some of these plans and policies need revisiting and just updating. And finally, we need to save the best, but we can't forget the rest. We encourage all states, including Maine, to view their higher PBR lands as particularly important and worthy of targeted protection. We know that all farmland has significant benefits for agriculture as well as important co-benefits, but our highest PBR lands are also the most threatened by conversion to both UHD and LDR. Chris, why don't we kick it back to you?
Great, thank you. So I think we have another question, but let me talk for a minute about this last slide and these two resources, and then maybe Nate, you can pose this last question, which I think actually is more of a comment. These are two resources. One is new, one is old. The Farmland Information Center is a collaboration we've had with USDA's NRCS for decades, and it is, I think, still underused because not many people know much about it. It tends to make the rest of us AFT staff look good because we sometimes come equipped with great information and research, and that's because we get it from our colleagues at the THIC, as we call it. It's a national clearinghouse that has information for both landowners, for producers, and for those people who are interested in farmland retention, protection, and access. It has a lot of information about basic, what is an agricultural conservation easement? Why should you care about protecting your land? There's a lot of information and new resources on land access and where farm link programs exist around the country. There is a lot of information with technical statistics and state policies, and you can ask a question if you're looking for something specific about an example of a state policy. You're welcome to call that number or go to the website and ask a question from there. So I really encourage people to look at that center as a wealth of information, and they are there to answer questions. So please pose questions to them. The National Ag Land Network is newly launched. It is intended to build the collective capacity of those of us who are working professionally in this space to learn from each other. So we have done in New England, and it was when we started this back when I was the New England director, we did regular forums where those of us from around the region who are working on permanent ag land protection got together to share notes and talk about particular challenges. We found that pretty valuable, and the idea here is to do that on a much more comprehensive basis and in more parts of the country. So if you are interested in being part of the network, please sign up for it there at farmland.org with that /NALN, or feel free to reach out to me to talk further about it. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Nate, for any last comments or questions we might have, and for any last perspectives from the commissioner.
Sure, thank you. You know, the last comment, I think it is more of a comment than a question, but it's an important one. I'm actually just going to read it verbatim because it's really good. Many of these goals can be achieved if agriculture can be profitable, can be a profitable economic venture. If this goal is met, disadvantaged farmers, young farmers, next generation farmers will better be able to engage in agriculture as a sustainable income source. The same with keeping farmers on the land and keeping that land in agriculture. Selling agricultural land is a last resort activity to infuse money into the family, or is our last ditch parachute to the farm family as they move on to other more income secure non-ag jobs for them. A particular plug to the AgCom in Maine. They've worked with many other Maine organizations to find the nexus between farmer needs and achieving public policy goals, such as ensuring that the land stays in agriculture, and land management and planning strategies focus on self-sustaining industries such as agriculture. Great comment. AgCom, phenomenal group, doing really great work in the state of Maine. So I'd like to just thank everybody again for their time. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited to be doing this work across New England and particularly in Maine. Thank you, Commissioner, for your time today. And I'm wondering if you have any parting words of wisdom or requests for help.
Well, I would just say again, thank you so much for holding this webinar and for the work that you've done to really dig into this data. It's very informative. I'm looking forward to future webinars and looking forward to working with you all at American Farmland Trust and others around the state to really look for ways for us to make sure that our farmland is productive and protected, whether it's through farm viability avenues or through permanent protection. We have a lot of work to do, and it's good to know that we've got a great crew of folks to work together with.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon and be safe.